Hello, my name is Linda McDonald, and this is Jean Sarson with me, and together we're from Persons Against Non-State Torture. It's a campaign that Jean and I started in 1993, 29 years ago, in Truro, Nova Scotia. We started working with one woman who identified herself as Sarah, and she disclosed that she was tortured and trafficked by her parents, by like-minded others, and tortured and trafficked till she was an adult woman, actually. And from that grassroots knowledge, we started our grassroots research and spoke with thousands of women all over the world, sharing the same stories as Sarah. And we've listened to their voices and developed a grassroots science research framework about what non-state torture is. And we're happy to share it with you today. So the first slide, Jean, please. What Jean and I did is we developed our work with models to help us understand the crime and the human rights violation, and then now we can use it as a form of education. So you'll see that this is the patriarchal divide that we developed, and it's part of our grassroots science, that torture is committed by non-state actors and is the intentional infliction of severe pain and suffering. So with the patriarchal divide, what we're saying is that state torture and non-state torture are basically the same as far as the action of the perpetrators are concerned. The only difference, or the main difference, is that the perpetrators in non-state torture are families, or they're strangers, or traffickers, or pornographers, pimps in prostitution, or buyers. So if you look at the acts of non-state torture, you'll compare on the left side to the state torture. There's electric shocking, beating, caging, water tortures, suffocation tortures, sexualized tortures, forced drugging, nutritional deprivation, psychological tortures, forced nakedness, sleep deprivation, and the witnessing of the torture of others, and the powerlessness. And why we call it a patriarchal divide is because in state torture, the primary victims are men. And that's where we started looking at torture after the war and warring men. But in non-state torture, it happens to women and girls primarily in their homes, in hotels, or in huts. And they deserve the same recognition of suffering the same crime of torture. Indeed, that it is the same crime and human rights violation. So that's the patriarchal divide. Next slide, Jean, please. So we're trying to explain to you with an example of three women that we supported, Sarah and Lynn and Elizabeth, to give you a sense of the criminal and formal networks of the organized family systems of torturers and traffickers. With Sarah, her father, her mother, even government employees were the key organizers involved in corruption and the torture and trafficking of her as a little girl up to the age of an adult woman. And her drawing shows a torture chamber in the basement of her own home that she endured for many years as a child and even as an adult woman. And Lynn is the second one. She married a man who became her torturer, her husband and her torturer. And he, along with three of his male friends, they kept her captive in a windowless room for 4.5 years until she escaped. This is just one example of what Lynn endured. I'll give you an example. And also there were police involved that came and tortured her, and they were part of the criminal protection of the group of her husband and the three friends. So Lynn endured a group gang rape where she was raped with a knife and she started to hemorrhage. And then she was taken to what she called the pig doctor, where he supposedly fixed her up and stopped her from hemorrhaging. And of course, the pig doctor would then be part of the criminal informal network. But remember that she endured much more than this. This is just one example. And then there's Elizabeth. She's a daughter of a father, a mother, and an uncle who tortured and trafficked her for many years from the time she was little to a much older person. And she was sold at the age of 5. And there's a drawing of her showing herself being transferred from her parents to strangers where she would be tortured and trafficked. Now I'll leave it the next 2 slides for Jean.
So this is the third slide, a way of explaining the non-state actor torture that, like Linda said, for 29 years, we've been supporting women. Category 1, Linda has already explained. Category 2, we call it classic non-state torture, commercial-based acts, because the perpetrators are making money off of the trafficking, the prostitution, torture, and snuff pornography victimizations, and also migrant domestic worker may be enslaved and tortured by her employer. And category 3, we call it social cultural traditions or religious-based acts, and we're list here: female genital mutilation, child marriage, acid burning, and widow burning, which we're told is declining. And this list comes from UN reports. And our final explanatory PowerPoint is about global truth-telling, is explaining the severe pain and suffering that millions of women and girls are surviving on this planet. So we start with the World Health Organization, who tells us 1/3 of the world's women and girls over the age of 15 suffer physical and sexualized violence. But because non-state actor torture is not identified, they are invisible. But we know not only are women and girls tortured, as Linda has explained in category 1, they're also exploited, and that's category 2. And the exploitation can start as newborns, and they become part of the 1 million children who suffer sexualized exploitation and suffer non-state torture too. And sexualized exploitation of women, we also know women are tortured, and also in the domestic workers who may be enslaved, and 71% of women and girls are part of the enslavement and forced labor. And some of these women will be tortured by their employer. And prostituted women, they do our participatory research, and they talk about the non-state torture that they've suffered, category 2 again. Category 3 starts with child brides, and they may also suffer non-state torture by their so-called in-laws or others. FGM, category 3 again. And widow rituals, that's also category 3, and they may be suffered commercial based if they're forced into prostitution, acid burning, and sorcery and witch hunts. And they may be tortured, and they may also end up as a femicide. And what we're asking for state parties to do is to work collectively to create a declaration that can work as a model strategy to raise global awareness and to end non-state actor torture.
Thank you.
I think educating people about non-state torture is very important, and it is a violation and crime of a person's rights. This was my life. Please stop and listen to me. I need you to hear me. I am Wanda, and I live in Canada. I am a survivor of non-state torture. I was a victim of non-state torture from conception until the night I almost died from suicide as an adult woman. I was constantly rented out to many, many people by the whole family and heard so often, bring her back when you're done. I was so frightened. I didn't know what the torturers were going to do to me or where they were taking me. It was horrendous, and some of the torturers were middle and upper class. A premier, judges, doctors, nurses, social workers, and counselors. For example, I had no voice. I did as I was ordered to do, and when I tried not to, I was tortured even more. It too was horrendous. I remember telling the torturers, take me, take me. My thinking was, I had been so dehumanized, I figured I could protect the others. I found out that didn't work. There wasn't anyone to help me, hear me, or believe me. I was taught suicide was the only way out. Jean and Linda heard me and cared. There was no one else in my country. So we three did it from the grassroots, learning from each other. If they had not heard and believed me, I would not be here today. As my fear was, I was going to die I can say with my own conviction and my own voice that today I am very proud of me. I am proud to be alive, and I look forward to the future knowing who I am.
Good day to everyone worldwide. My name is Jeanette Westbrook, and I'm speaking to you from Louisville, Kentucky, in the United States of America. I want to talk to you today about non-state torture. I'm a survivor of non-state torture. That is, torture that is committed by non-state actors, torture that is committed in families and in the private sphere and in our communities worldwide. I want to let you know that we must codify non-state torture, because what we're really talking about here is crime, organized crime. And the crime that we're talking about is torture itself. In 2007, a UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women took my confidential report to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. My detailed report on the torture, prostitution, pornography, and trafficking that I experienced from young childhood to age 24. I want to know that I detailed the human rights violations and the personal consequences of my exploitation in this document, and standing firmly on Articles 2, 4, and Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Committee on Torture, and all articles of CEDAW. We, the world body, cannot put forth binding elements and human rights documents, treaties, and law that provides protections and recognized international legal remedies for all, especially for those who experienced state-sponsored torture, but deny those same human rights and those same legal remedies to non-state torture victims worldwide. I want to recount for you some of the tortures that I experienced. What I'm recounting here are exactly the same type of tortures experienced by state-sponsored torture, such as the torture and the accounts that we're now hearing from Ukraine. I experienced rape and incest, placed in cages, gagged and bound, hung upside down, locked in closets and basements, use of hot objects, torture with electricity, forced to watch the torture of others. There are many, many acts of torture that I can account. But what I want to say to you, we need to codify, we need to make non-state torture part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so that those that are experiencing torture in their own homes and in their own families and communities can also find a legal remedy for these criminal acts. I thank you.
Hello, my name is Yamor, and I have discovered Jean and Linda's work last year, and I haven't stopped working on torture ever since, because I've come to the realization that it's an issue that is much more widespread than we think, and that is not considered as such. And I think this is why every state and international organizations, institutions such as the UN should take the issue seriously and start looking at it, and especially look at forms of tortures that are not perceived as such and go beyond discourses legitimizing or rendering this torture invisible just because it happens to women and girls, just because it is sexualized, or just because there are industries profiting from it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is John Witterdijk. I am a professor of criminology at Mount Royal University in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, home of the 1988 Winter Olympics. I have been studying modern-day slavery, or human trafficking as it is commonly referred to in most circles, since the signing of the Palermo Protocol in 2002. Over the years, I have published several books, written numerous articles, and conducted several research studies on or around the theme of trafficking in persons. However, it was not until I co-organized a conference in Asadi, Spain around 2017 that I first learned about non-state torture. As an academic, I found it interesting that although modern-day slavery has been with us for literally thousands of years, and that the exploitation of primarily women and girls has a long and tragic history, it was only been recently, within a historical context, that we have begun to use such terminology as non-state torture and femicide. In fact, the latter term was only introduced to the UN lexicon in around 2012. It was during a presentation at the UNODC conference by Linda McDonald and Jean Sorensen that I learned about non-state torture, or NST. Linda and Jean are two of the pioneers who have championed the awareness of NST as a crime unto itself. Linda and Jean note on their website that NST is a form of torture committed in the private or domestic sphere and shares many of the same characteristics as state torture, which is widely acknowledged as a crime. Furthermore, as Linda and Jean note in their recent book, Women Unsilenced, published in 2021, an estimated 1/3 of women and girls experience some form of physical and/or sexual violence during their lifetime. Thankfully, NST is gradually being recognized as a specific crime, and by acknowledging the nature of the crime as a non-state form of torture, it sheds light and should prompt us to not only pay more attention to this phenomena, but to inform and educate ourselves about this crime and ultimately introduce legislation to allow for proper attention and redress. This important 4-day exhibit represents a positive and, dare I say, overdue event, which will hopefully help to create greater awareness and urgency around this grievous crime. I commend the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice on hosting this exhibit and hope it will attract many viewers and help to trigger a landslide of attention and awareness to this gross human rights violation. Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth Gordon and I'm from the UK. I was born into a family that tortured and trafficked me in my childhood. I've worked hard to recover and am healed from the non-state torture and trafficking victimizations. Educating about non-state torture is important to me, so every person knows that it is a human rights violation and a crime, that it is very common and most often committed against women and children in their homes and other private spaces. With the torture victimization I survived, named correctly by Jean and Linda, I have been free to tell the truthful reality about who the perpetrators were and what they did. And I've been respectfully listened to around the truth of the torture I endured. The tortures were like being drugged, tied up, hung up, caged, being deprived of sleep at night while being shouted at for hours, while restrained and raped, being constantly terrified and powerless to escape because I was a child. When I was told that the perpetrators had violated my human rights, this helped me to know I was a person, and this was healing, because torture destroys your sense of self. I could let go of the perpetrator's conditioning that it had been my fault, or that I was bad or evil or crazy. And I could see that my body talk responses were normal responses to being torture victimized. In the UK, When women who've been non-state tortured and trafficked seek support, they're routinely pathologized, labeled with a mental illness and a disorder. Their torture victimization is misnamed abuse or assault. And this ignores and denies that their human rights have been violated. It discriminates against survivors of non-state torture and silences them from being able to speak their truth accurately and to tell about the torture crimes they suffered. Non-state torture is more than abuse because it's always life-threatening. And many women and children who've been tortured die from their injuries. So it's important that it has recognition in law appropriate to the devastating impact on persons so victimized. Once we name non-state torture as a crime, my hope is that everyone will be able to speak about it. Survivors will be able to tell and reach out for torture-informed care and support, and persons who commit non-state torture crimes can be held accountable.
My name is Alexandra Lane. I was born into a non-state torture family. Learning that non-state torture is a human rights violation gave me a sense of worth as a human that I hadn't felt before. The benefits of public being educated is that victims of non-state torture will learn they are not alone. My hope is that educating will result in better understanding and resources for those who have survived non-state torture. And that with education, the public will demand that non-state torture be made a crime in countries where it isn't already. That way, those who torture children and women would no longer be protected by a legal system who doesn't already include non-state torture as a human rights violation. Awareness can bring unity and a demand for change. There is strength in numbers, and education is a way to promote human rights for everyone.
Hi, my name is Robert Holodak. My wife is Alexandra Lane, and she's a victim of non-state torture. I'm making this video for our good friends, Linda and Jean, who have been working tirelessly over the years to bring awareness and visibility to non-state torture and its effects or its need to be considered a human rights violation throughout the world. I could say that as a husband and a partner and loving someone who has been a victim of non-state torture and seeing the ramifications and implications on how it's affected her and her ability to live life. It's a very important topic for us to continue to bring forward a lot of the things that I think are critically important that people need to understand. You know, the fact is that non-state torture is a real thing. It happens every day, and it happens in people's families all over the world. We want to be able to shine a light on the fact that there are resources that are needed to be able to help the people who have survived non-state torture, but also to be able to shine a light on the fact that countries need to think of this more as a crime, specifically to the nature of what happens to people who are impacted by non-state torture. You know, as a couple, we are adamant in our need to be able to create awareness around what is important to know for people in the positions of leading the governments and leading the countries that they're in to be able to change the laws and to provide the services that people need to help them recover from this very atrocious crime. So we're here to support it. I love my wife. She's the most incredible human being I've ever met. And I would be here to support her in anything that she wants to do as a husband, a partner, and as her being the love of my life. Thank you.
My name is Megan Walker, and I am the former executive director of the London Abused Women Centre in London, Ontario, a position I held for almost 25 years. During that time, many women presented and shared their experiences of being tortured. Yet there is no legislation in Canada to validate their torture. Although many judges will report women being tortured, there really is no way for those women to have their cases pursued through the courts in Canada on the grounds of non-state torture. Education is so important. Education about non-state torture, which will allow everybody in society to understand the differences between non-state torture and assault or aggravated sexual assault. Women need us to bear witness to their experiences and to validate those experiences. And if we live in a society that doesn't understand the issue, those experiences often go unheard. So educating individuals, lawyers, physicians, all of society, including the criminal justice system, is absolutely paramount for women and girls to move on in their lives after being tortured.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caroline P. Roberts. I live in Canada right now. I'm a survivor of 8 years of human trafficking and non-state torture. I think, in fact, I know that non-state torture needs to be acknowledged, recognized, and addressed because it's real and it's an added component to whatever hell someone is going through with an abuser or a trafficker. And I think also that it should be on the law books and it should be an added charge. It needs to be recognized from that perspective and the punishment that should go with it. I had private body parts amputated as punishment. I'm working with women who've had horrific things done to them that go above and beyond what somebody might call domestic abuse or trafficking. And many of them cannot recover from that, what was done to them. And justice needs to be given to these people. I'm talking men and women, although I primarily am working with women, but I know men that have been brutalized by torture that was inflicted from a non-state entity or persons. It's essential that it's recognized, and it's essential that the suffering of myself and those others doesn't go unanswered for. And it hasn't been in vain. Please let our suffering have some good come from it, because I like to talk about taking purpose from the pain. And so I'm taking that purpose here today to talk to you about this and say to you, please acknowledge that it exists, and please acknowledge that these people need some form of justice. And you can do that by acknowledging it and recognizing it. So please, please help me and help the others that are currently going through it and those that are going to go through it, because it's not stopping. It's not stopping until there are ramifications and repercussions for it. So please make the effort, take the time to learn about it, educate yourself, and talk to others about it. And perhaps even if the only thing you do is talk to one other person about this, you'll have done something. And perhaps by doing that, you can prevent somebody else from going through it. Thank you.
My name is Andrea Hines, and I am a grassroots feminist activist from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. At the age of 22, I was deep in debt and on the doorstep of homelessness. It was then that an ad in my local newspaper caught my attention, offering thousands of dollars a week for young women to provide what they called adult entertainment. At the time, I did not know what that meant or what would be expected of me. For the next 7 years, I experienced thousands of men paying to sexually access my body, many of those men being cruel and violent towards me. A lack of awareness and education, coupled with strong social narratives supporting sex work ideology, made it so that I accepted the ongoing violence as normal and just part of the job. On multiple occasions, sex buyers choked me, whipped me, shocked me with electricity, burnt my skin with hot wax, filmed and photographed me without my knowledge, raped me without condoms, called me every derogatory name imaginable, and overall treated me as non-human. These acts of non-state torture were rebranded and sold to me as kink or BDSM. Being paid for these acts skewed my perception, leading me to believe that what was happening to me was acceptable when it wasn't. I have now been out of prostitution for 10 years, but I still struggle with the effects of being subjected to non-state torture, most notably shame, anxiety, emotional flatness, and sexual dysfunction. The exploitation I endured is not uncommon. Sexual exploitation is an issue affecting millions of women and girls all throughout the world every single day. To address this epidemic, we must sound the alarm and prioritize education about non-state actors harming vulnerable and marginalized women in prostitution. I would like to see increased education and training on non-state torture so the global community can move towards better treatment and outcome for those who have been subjected to patriarchal harm. It's important that this work be survivor-centered and rooted in feminist ideology. Very few countries have enacted laws that name and address torture that is committed by private individuals and groups. Non-state torture needs to be named as a human rights crime so that we can continue the work of helping and healing all those who have been impacted.
My name is Janneke Lewis, and I've been a criminal and family lawyer for 38 years. In my professional life, I've specialized in issues of child abuse and intimate partner abuse. In my volunteer life, I've worked with Soroptimist International, an NGO at the UN raising awareness of human trafficking. I've presented at international conferences, including at the UN 11th Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice in 2005 in Bangkok. I aim to raise awareness of the extent of human trafficking in the world. Do you think educating about non-state torture being a human rights violation and crime is important? Yes, it is. Torture is the deliberate infliction of severe pain or suffering on a person for reasons such as punishment, extracting a confession, coercing behavior, interrogation for information, or intimidating third parties. The United Nations has condemned torture in both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 and in the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, and Degrading Punishment or Treatment, ratified in 1987. Signatory states agree that torture is illegal. However, non-state torture is not identified as a crime. But torture is used by non-state agents, such as human traffickers and organized crime. It is estimated by the ILO that 40.3 million people are trafficked in the world for a variety of reasons, such as labor, sexual services, marriage, or organ harvesting, to name a few. Trafficking victims are not enslaved by chains, but by systematic acts of torture, such as assault, threats of assault or death, sleep deprivation, kidnapping, withholding identity documents, threats of violence against others, including family members, until that trafficked victim is broken down and compliant. The accumulative effect of all of these acts is so much more than just the acts of violence themselves. Traffickers can place these people in society and yet keep that control on them through the torture. Raising awareness as to what non-state torture is, how it is inflicted, and against whom it is inflicted will enable more people to identify it. Once people can identify situations of non-state torture, it increases society's ability to take steps against such torture. 40 million people. These people depend on ordinary members of society to rescue them and help them. It's time we all became educated that torture exists and needs to be stopped. It's time that we became aware of the extent of non-state torture. It's time we took a collective stand against it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eleanor Cowan. I am an editor, Canadian writer, and a retired teacher. I'm very happy today to support the very important work of Linda McDonald and Jean Sarson in their book, Women Unsilenced. This is a very important discussion about torture. Perhaps the American author Zora Neale Hurston said it best, you gotta go there to know there. Torture has distinct characteristics. Imagine that at dinner time, children's arms are handcuffed behind their backs. They are forced to eat dog food from a dog food bowl, or they arrive home from school and are tied into rope nets hanging from the basement ceiling. If they vomit or defecate, they must ingest the material. These kids must also attend insider night school, where, as a sign of their commitment and allegiance to the family, they must remain silent while electric shocked or gang raped. Unborn fetuses are removed in ritual ceremonies. At Insider Night School, children are taught how to quickly end their lives should they find themselves about to reveal family rituals to those who might not understand. Many police, teachers, and medical personnel are completely untrained in how to identify tortured children because the intentional, contrived, studied torture of children remains unacknowledged in Canada. Meticulously planned and in no way spontaneous or random, the torture of children remains a source of exquisite pleasure for the committed, knowledgeable, fanatical torturers who, hiding in plain sight, know how to cover their tracks. None of us want to go there. None of us want to be observed by greedy eyes soaking up the pleasure of the intense pain they carefully designed for us. Let us not disregard the children who've been there, who are there right now, and who desperately beg us to provide the words to say it. Non-state torture. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bob Ryan, and I'm a musician and recording engineer living on Vancouver Island on the west coast of Canada. I'd like to share some thoughts about the phenomenon of non-state torture. We live in a profound period of human history, a period in which an increasing number of the most heinous behaviors of human beings are being exposed and examined, and the pain and suffering of the victims of these behaviors are finally being acknowledged and understood. Wherever we turn these days, we see abusive behaviors being dragged into the spotlight, and we as people are being called upon to confront and deal with things that are often distasteful, uncomfortable to face and to talk about. Non-state torture is one such topic, one that can be found in virtually every country and community across the globe. Most of us are familiar with state torture or military torture and are aware of any number of laws and prohibitions against it. But non-state torture has festered in the dark, well below the awareness of most of us. And many of us understandably struggle to envision non-state torture, even when we do hear of it, wishing to believe that such a thing cannot possibly exist. And if it does, certainly not in any significant amount. And it is in just such an environment that non-state torture is able to thrive unopposed, leaving its perpetrators to act with impunity and its victims to suffer and die unheard and unaided. Thankfully, the situation is beginning to change. Some among us have been working tirelessly to bring to light compelling evidence of the extent to which non-state torture is occurring around us. An opportunity is now plainly before us to collectively arise as a people and confront the truth of non-state torture, to fearlessly examine its roots and causes, to put a stop to its perpetrators, and to hear and help its victims. I know we can and must do this. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Peter Cribb, and I'm from Canada. I'd like to talk to you today about non-state torture. What we've learned about torture in the West here came from our childhood growing up, watching television shows and going to movies, and what we've learned from history. Non-state torture is a relatively new term for something that has been going on far too long. That is the torture of children in families, neighbors, trafficking children. And it's not well known here in the West, and I suspect other parts of the world as well, because it's not talked about enough. I was fortunate enough to marry a wonderful woman 25 years ago, a very strong, very intelligent woman who was a feminist, and later learned that she was tortured as a baby by her father, and then again tortured for years at residential school. And what I learned from her is that non-state torture is fueled by the misogynistic toxicity that we live in these days. And unless and until that is addressed, the male dominance that takes place everywhere in our society, then this is going to go on for a very long time, this suffering, this cruelty. I also have an adult son who was tortured here in Canada for 1.5 years and sustained a severe brain injury and suffers from PTSD. And he's at home, and my wife and I will be taking care of him for the rest of our lives. So I just wanted to speak out, especially to men, and with a request that there's a book out called Women Unsilenced. And it was written by Linda McDonald and Jean Sarson, and it's a very difficult book to read because it's about the experiences of non-state torture. But having read it and having made it through it, it's really opened my eyes, and I'm hoping it'll do the same for you as well. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Renee LaFortune, and I am a torture survivor, and I am the mother of a torture survivor. I wanted to talk about why I think education about non-state torture is important, because in every culture of the world, everywhere in the world, the violence, commodification, and exploitation, abuse of women has been minimized and normalized. And if women know what is happening to them and they can name it as torture, then they can talk about it, they can heal from it, they can work towards making it illegal, making it a crime, the crime that it should be. Non-state torture happens everywhere, all the time, and it's an invisible thing because women can't name it. And if people could be educated, especially women, children, everyone needs to know what it is and how it's perpetrated. I mean, when I think about my own experience growing up, I would not have called it torture. I would have thought this is normal, and this happens in every family, and this happens in every residential school, and this happens in every church, because it happened to all the girls I knew. And had we known, we would have probably not kept the secret, not been so silent. We would have named and identified our abusers, and something could have been done. But it's very important, because women are exploited, children are exploited everywhere, all the time.